What is up, guys? I got another exciting announcement. I just picked the winner for the orange camo Bell MX9. That is going to John Maloney, but I got some more exciting news. I got a second Bell MX9 in a even cooler color. In my opinion, this is the kind of purple, I don't know if it's camo, but the purple color. As you can see, awesome. Same thing, brand new, never used, size large. All you got to do is subscribe if you want to win it. I'm going to announce the winner in a month, send it to your house free of charge. Also, I got a brand new, never used 1-up chain guide. Once again, never used, really tidy and simple and lightweight. I just already have one, so I don't need it. All you got to do is subscribe. I'm going to pick the winner for this probably in a couple weeks. Notify you, ship it to your house. I appreciate you guys tuning in. This is a way for me to show thanks. And anyways, on to the video. What is up, guys? We are talking about some of the downhill bikes that are at the Hardline Redbull Tasmania event. There are some cool, interesting bike setups. There are some one-off prototype bikes from companies that have not been involved in the sport for decades. We're going to take a look at it, check out some of the geometry, what is available, especially reach and chainstay. Although some of these are prototype bikes and many of them are just custom modded for the riders. So there's not often an actual specific number available because they are specifically tailored to the rider. But getting into it, one of the most interesting bikes is the prototype Canyon downhill bike. It's being ridden by none other than Josh Brycland, one of my personal favorites, one of the most likable dudes in the sport. Left the sport way too early, got hurt in a 2014 World Championship freak accident, overshooting the bridge, breaking his ankle to pieces, raced a couple more years, then left. Not to get sidetracked, Josh Brycland, one of the best riders out there, and he is now on Cannondale, a bike that for many, many years really has not been associated with gravity mountain biking. More so, they got a great road team. They're really successful in XC, but it's cool to see them realize the value of downhill, the fact that it is, in my opinion, the pinnacle of mountain biking, and it is awesome to see them investing money, time, research, engineers, sponsorship dollars to get their downhill program up and running. And it's not a full World Cup effort. I don't know what Josh Brycland's, I know he's planning on racing this year, but the new UCI team rules are kind of funky. So I'm not sure if we'll see him show up at a World Cup race, but I'm getting ahead of myself. He's at the Hardline Downhill event, and let's check his bike out. So one interesting, notable thing is that in spite of this being a prototype, it is made of carbon. That is pretty atypical. Usually you will see test mules made of aluminum. It's a little bit easier to assemble, and you can literally have someone fabricate it in-house. Carbon fiber molds are more complicated, more costly, and typically you will wait for the production end before you see a bike come out in carbon. The other unique thing about this bike is the fact that it has two shocks. So if you see, or if you look at the frame, you will notice there is actually two different areas where the shock can be mounted. And that is not, as is typically the case, a just different mounting bolt for one shock that will change either geometry or the suspension progressivity. That is actually allowing the frame to mount an additional shock. In my opinion, this is kind of a good example of the weird, quirky, borderline nonsensical stuff that many bike companies were very fond of. We are now seeing bike designs and bike companies really understand that the importance of ride quality is not in some gimmicky, complicated suspension design, two shocks, some weird pull shock. Oftentimes, the simpler the suspension design, the easier it is going to be able to get it really dialed. And so it's funny seeing them obviously not opt for the second shock. I would not be surprised if they really never opt for the secondary shock, because I don't believe it adds really anything to it. It's cool and it's interesting and it's fun as a bike nerd, but when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of performance, it has little to do with making a bike that performs better. Also really surprising, Formula suspension. I remember they were more prominent probably 10 years ago, but boy, apart from Josh Brycland running it. I do not see anybody using this suspension. I have not seen a production bike come with it. I'm actually surprised they're still making it. I don't really understand how the X's and O's of the financial sheet like sort of validates or offers a way to profit off a suspension product that, I mean, how many downhill Formula forks do they sell, or even Formula forks? I like seeing different products, and it's fun seeing more companies get involved, but I would love to see how the financials work out, because I don't get how they wouldn't be losing lots of money, because you need a certain level of scale to make it viable. And I don't know how many forks or shocks they're selling, but it can't be very many. So anyways, next up is the Troy Brosnan Canyon prototype. This is a yet to be released. This will hit production. Also really cool, or I would say controversial. I don't know how I feel about the electronically automatically adjusting suspension. Troy Brosnan is sponsored by RockShox, and you can see his bike is equipped with it. So I don't believe that the downhill suspension components are yet offered with their flight attendant. Everything else in the RockShox ranges. I have not ridden it. I don't know how I feel about it. I like simple bikes. I don't want electronic motors and software seeping into what I believe is the coolest thing in the world, the bicycle. And I like it simple. I am always a sucker for simplicity, and I, for one, am never going to be opting for electronic suspension. As simple as I can keep it, and I know there's people that take it to an even greater degree, running, single speeds or hardtails. And I have a full suspension bike. I have a YT Jeffsy. I got a specialized demo downhill bike, and I'm just not super into it. I get why they run it, but I would be lying if I said it doesn't bum me out a little bit. Plus, I can't imagine what the servicing cost is. It's already expensive to properly keep your suspension sort of, fresh in, service. So I would only imagine that adds a couple $100s to it. So not super keen on it. This is another situation where there is very few, if any, details. It looks to be a full carbon chassis, and that's pretty much it. Pretty much no details, so we pretty much have to admire it at this point. Next up is the Frameworks downhill machine, one of the coolest stories in the sport. Nico Mullally, who has ridden more bikes than most, been on the biggest factory teams, left in tents in, I forget what year, and set out to design his own bike. Most people at the time were like, kind of random, kind of interesting. Okay, maybe this will lead to something. Maybe it'll lead to nowhere. Well, guess what? World champion Asa Vermette won on that very bike. Not to mention just having a rider the caliber of Asa Vermette on that bike pretty much tells you everything you need to know. Nico and sort of his bike stands as an antithesis to the complicated, overly designed bikes with weird linkage layouts and strange shock kinematics and all sorts of just trickery that ultimately at the end of the day has very little to do with performance. That bike is a simple, stripped down, fundamentally as simple as you can get machine, and because of it, that is why, in my opinion, he managed to make a bike so good so quickly. Frameworks is an anomaly, and it's because, in my opinion, they were not adhering to a specific suspension design that the larger company was mandating. They weren't trying to design something different for the sake of being different. I believe that has been to a lesser extent now, but was a big problem in the mountain bike industry, is that there's 150, 200 bike companies. We kind of know what works. And so what you end up getting is many companies, A, doing the same thing, just to a lesser level and to a, lesser degree of competency. And B, many companies doing weird, goofy shit for the sake of doing something weird and different and trying to create this sort of individualized bike and look and design, throw some catchy marketing behind it. It's cool being a part of a sport for long enough to see that we have now kind of moved past that. we're now entering a phase where many bikes are looking similar. The new Specialized Stump Jumper looks just like the Jeffsy, looks just like the Canyon Trail bike. And I realize it might seem kind of boring and kind of lame that the days of weird, funky, two shocks, pull shock, weird, if you remember the Scott downhill bike, knuckle sandwich, suspension design, it's kind of sad that we're not seeing these weird designs anymore, but the reason is because they just don't work. As you add complexity, you are essentially making the equation more difficult for yourself. So just to match the performance of a simple stripped down bike like the Frameworks takes a lot more time, a lot more energy. Jordy from Fox talked about that essentially the simpler your suspension design is, the easier you are going to get that shock to be well suited to the bike in terms of the damper and the tune, the compression, the rebound. And so Nico kind of exemplified this, and this is why his humble Frameworks company that make a couple hundred bikes a year if that, are able to beat Goliath. That it's quite likely that Asa is on a prototype bike, so the numbers are not necessarily available, but from what I've seen, it is largely based on the production size large, and that is a reach of 485 and a chainstay of 460. Anyways, as you can tell, I'm a fan of what Frameworks is doing. Moving on to the Mondraker, this is the bike that Ronnan Donne is riding. He is obviously in the best form of his life. He's only 22 years old, so arguably has still yet to even hit his full prime. And last year was a just total breakout season for him. So could he win the Hardline race? Absolutely. They were one of the early ones sort of utilizing the tuned mass damper attached to the rear chainstay. I don't believe Ronnan Donne is running it at this track. Maybe he deemed it wasn't sort of advantageous, unnecessary. Typically on softer tracks like the Tasmania track, that is going to be less of an advantage because you're not getting that super high speed sort of frequency chatter that you get on like a really hard packed kind of bike park track, where you get anybody that's ridden a bike park and has gone through braking bumps on a sun-baked trail knows what I'm talking about. That is where every ounce of advantage you can get from that tuned mass damper would be welcome, because that just vibration and chatter, it's kind of at a frequency beyond the realm of what suspension can deal with. And because bikes are so light comparative to the rider on top of them, you feel all of it. But at Tasmania, the dirt is softer. It's not that just had the piss beaten out of it like a bike park track like Leo Gang, or just a track that is really rough like Val de Sol. It looks like the Hardline track isn't that rough, so perhaps the mass dampers wouldn't really make of a difference. He got rid of it. He's not using it unless it's hidden in the bike, which I assume is a possibility. So in terms of what Ronnan is actually running, again, this is a prototype bike, so we're not necessarily sure, but what I can say is that he is likely running the biggest bike in the pits, a reach number of around 500 millimeters, and he is a pretty big guy. I think he might be 6'1", so that's not surprising. Obviously, as you get bigger, you need a bigger bike, duh. But what is interesting is the chainstay is comparatively short at 450 in relation to reach. So this is the shortest chainstay, again, in relation to reach of any of the riders. Jackson Goldstone probably has the longest chainstay in relation to reach. His is a likely 475 reach, perhaps 480, but a 460 chainstay, where Ronnan is likely running a 500 or 505 reach with a 450 chainstay, but that could be a lot longer because they experiment, so that is not a necessarily written in stone geometry reference because they're constantly experimenting, but I did find that interesting. And it's funny looking at the Mondraker at how slim this bike is. There are integrated stiffness adjustment adjustment struts on the chainstay, but you can pretty clearly see by the design and the silhouette of this frame that they are really approaching it in a way to maximize compliance. The frame and the chassis and how stiff or how much flex it is able to sort of offer when you're riding has a big impact on how the bike feels. much bigger than I think many riders would believe. A lot of the harshness, a lot of the feedback, a lot of how your bike really feels has a lot to do with the stiffness of everything from the rims to the spoke tension to the chassis, and the Mondraker is pretty clearly in sharp contrast to the past 10 years of bike companies saying you need a stiffer and stiffer bike. You can see how slim the chainstays are, how overall sort of just slimmed down the frame is, and pretty clearly they are not going for maximal stiffness. They are going for a good balance. Next up is the Santa Cruz V10, the rider that I believe is going to be winning. He is the man in downhill right now. Everybody is going to have to beat him to win these races and to win World Cups. And he has got Steve Peat on the team. He has been on Santa Cruz since the very early days of that V10. I remember him riding it when they released one of the first, I believe it was either GT or Santa Cruz that released the first carbon fiber downhill bike. And it's funny looking at it now, because now I feel like carbon has kind of lost a lot of its luster. Not that it's still cool, but it's pretty clear that aluminum is every ounce as capable as carbon. It's not the wonder material that we believed it to be. This is not road cycling. Weight doesn't matter that much. And some of the benefits of aluminum, especially in terms of the environmental aspect and its ability to be recycled, is significantly advantageous over carbon. But it's cool that a rider like Steve Peat, that is probably playing a large role in helping Jackson Goldstone, he's one of the best riders to do it, has been on this team from almost day one. He was a sort of compatriot with Greg Minnaar, who is probably one of the smartest dudes in the sport, the literal GOAT. So not only do you have the GOAT of the sport, but he is also just one of the most knowledgeable racers, really understood what it took to get the best out of the bike. He's now at Norco, sort of spearheading that effort, but Jackson Goldstone is benefiting from all the development. The geometry numbers for Jackson, again, this could be completely different. 475 reach, 460 chainstay, the closest numbers from reach to chainstay, so he is clearly prioritizing a very balanced bike. He's got a very upright neutral position. He is kind of in sharp contrast to Finn Isles, that has got a really aggressive low over the front position. I'm not saying one or the other is better, but Jackson has got that very upright riding style, and it's interesting to see him prioritize a bike that really allows him to ride in the center of it with that long chainstay, and him do what we know he can do, and that is just make it look unbelievable. Anyways, that is a sort of wrap up of the bikes. I didn't go through every one because it would take like 5 hours. You know, this video is already going to be long enough, but it's cool seeing the bikes. It's cool seeing the riders there. It's an awesome event, and yeah, hope you guys enjoy the video. Let me know what you think. What bikes do you got? What bikes do you want? Frameworks. We got the Intense that I didn't talk about, but lots of awesome bikes. There's no big commensal riders there. The Frenchies aren't there, so that's why I didn't do a video on probably or debatably the best downhill bike, the commensal, but none of the top riders are there. So let me know what you guys think, and hope you enjoyed the video.